Over the last 7 years, tens of thousands of people have stopped being tax residents in South Africa. That's according to the South African Revenue Service. Let's speak to Delano Abdoll, Legal Manager, Cross-Border Taxation at Tax Consulting South Africa. Thank you so much for your time on Kaya Biz this evening. Let's just start with the basic terms. What does it mean to be a tax resident?
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I think a great starting point, what does it mean to be tax resident? When we talk about being tax resident in South Africa, we're referring to a legislative definition which is prescribed by the Income Tax Act. And when one reads that definition, we are looking at someone who considers South Africa to be their real and permanent home. Alternatively, they spend sufficient number of days in South Africa to justify them triggering residency in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. How does someone stop being a tax resident?
In terms of SARS's current processes, it's a formal request that needs to be made by a registered taxpayer via their e-filing profiles. And essentially, they need to give SARS an opportunity to actually verify the legality of that request. One could make that request either in terms of South African domestic law, alternatively rely on international treaty law. To categorize the difference, one avenue is asking SARS to classify the individual as a non-resident permanently, whereas the other is only asking SARS to view them as non-resident for a specified period of time. Put differently, on a temporary basis.
Do we have a sense, Delano, of how many people leave? Let's start with people who leave, and then we'll deal with the people who come back later.
Perfect. I think from what I see on a day-to-day basis, there are many taxpayers who actually leave South Africa for purposes of employment. So most taxpayers are seeking to protect that foreign-sourced income they gain from being double taxed. And their rationale for regularizing their status as a non-resident with SARS is really aimed at protecting themselves from an unnecessary tax burden, usually a double tax burden, depending on where they relocate to.
And so when people who leave, you've spoken about these challenges that they may have. How elaborate or simple is the process? I know, we have e-filing on SARS. You can do a lot of things online. You can do a lot of the forms. Anecdotally, I hear people who struggle with removing themselves from the jaws of SARS's ever-widening collection efforts.
So I think the basic and fundamental aspects you must consider is we are talking about individuals who are registered for tax with SARS, for personal income tax specifically, and they have their tax number linked to a SARS e-filing profile. So at a profile level, you're really dealing with a track record of your South African tax affairs with the Revenue Authority. And by virtue of leaving South Africa, it's often a misconception that you are no longer obligated to manage that record. So by managing that record, there's still the obligation of filing tax returns. And the question then is, will I be filing my tax return on a resident basis, or will I be filing it on a non-resident basis? That's where the practical element comes in, is to fulfill the filing obligation. I need clarity on, do I want to file it as a resident or as a non-resident?
Okay. What about people who come back?
So people who come back, we must be referring then to people who've regularized their exit. Because if they formalize themselves to be non-resident following SARS's verification, it's important to know what was the qualifying basis upon which they made that request. On the one side, Those who've requested to be non-resident on a temporary basis, so relying on international treaty law, it is simply a matter of reinstating their residency from the day they returned to South Africa.
Okay.
So when they left, they transitioned from resident to non-resident. And when they returned, they have again informed SARS, this time to be updated from a non-resident back to a resident. That's the one area. The other area is those who made a request to SARS on the basis that they would not return to South Africa long term. And it may be problematic for them having to explain to the Revenue Authority why that intention has changed.
Okay. I mean, life does happen. Again, anecdotally, two sets of friends of ours who left feeling as though South Africa was not a place for them or their children have gone overseas and done relatively well, but have realized that actually there is no place like home and our problems are all different. I wonder what the impact is of these around 50,000 people leaving over the last 7 years or so on what happens with the state of South Africa, what happens with monies that, our tax funds, very important things in our country, it's meant to at least. And if we are seeing this flow of people leaving and their money, I'm assuming, also leaving, there's implications there.
There's certainly implications. So I think a good backdrop to this question is to keep in mind that SARS's legislative purpose is to collect as much tax as possible. And for every individual who successfully, through SARS verification, updates their status to a non-resident, it means that SARS loses their taxing right to tax that individual's foreign-sourced income. So the more individuals who successfully obtain that non-resident status translates to an increase in registered taxpayers who no longer need to pay tax to SARS on a certain portion of their income.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Delano Abdoll, Legal Manager, Cross-Border Taxation at Tax Consulting South Africa, joining us to speak about the implications of people leaving and no longer being tax residents in South Africa. Appreciate your time on KayaBiz this evening.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.
All right.